Throughout the bustling streets of Hong Kong, we see a commercial utopia with pork buns on every corner and a dense population. However, a darker Hong Kong lurks just beneath the surface that sports violence, fear, and loss. And at the center of it all is Wei Shen. Raised in old prosperity, Wei grew up with future members of the Hong Kong triads, most notably the Sun On Yee, though due to a sister who became addicted to drugs, Wei's family decided that the best course of action was to seek a better life in America. Years later, Wei, now a police officer, lands a job to go undercover with the Special Duties Unit to infiltrate the triads of Hong Kong. But I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. Let's instead rewind and take a look at how we got here. In 2002, developer Luxoflux announced, as they described it, an action racing game inspired by popular action films for the PlayStation 2, titled True Crime: Streets of LA. True Crime LA released to mixed reviews but sold quite well. Starring a police officer investigating a series of bombings in Chinatown, the game sported racing, gunplay, and even multiple endings. It's obviously a product of its time though, since most critics criticized its poor graphical fidelity and performance. And as it is an open-world third-person action game, 101 comparisons to the Grand Theft Auto series were thrown its way. Just 3 years later though, we received True Crime New York City. Despite being a separate story to the first entry in the True Crime series, it starred a New York gangster turned police officer freshly promoted to the role of detective who witnessed the death of his mentor, and he has to get to the bottom of it. Unfortunately, True Crime New York received the same criticisms which highlighted the game's many graphical blunders, and some had theorized that the game was rushed to meet release windows. While many applauded its gameplay and the overall product, it sold poorly and was deemed a financial flop. This led to the game's publisher, Activision, to put the series on hiatus, eventually handing the duty of creating the next entry years later to United Front Games. There were some other reasons as to why the product was scrapped, but there are other videos that go into greater detail on that. United Front, based out of Vancouver, Canada, was a promising developer as they had already developed smash hits like Mod Nation Racers and pretty much nothing else. Regardless, they took an open-world game that they were already developing and reworked it into True Crime Hong Kong. True Crime Hong Kong seemed very much like the other True Crime games, though with added visual fidelity and a seemingly reworked combat system that took inspiration from the still recently released Batman Arkham Asylum. As a few years went by, we saw more and more gameplay trailers and there were a few immediate issues. The first was the new protagonist, Wei Shen, looked quite generic and forgettable. The best way to describe this was that it looked like you were just playing as an NPC, not an actual protagonist. Pairing this with a couple of other issues, and I'm sure Activision saw the writing on the walls, as the game following up the financial bomb that was True Crime New York was not likely to be a success. Other factors also led to a loss in confidence as delays were frequent and the budget was getting tighter and tighter. With all that, Activision cancelled True Crime Hong Kong. Fortunately, Square Enix decided to pick up the title. They allowed United Front to finish up development, iron out any kinks, and see their vision through, all publishing it under a new title, completely disconnected from the True Crime series. Taking place in the crime-ridden region of Hong Kong, you play as Wei Shen getting into all sorts of undercover trouble, which includes hijacking cars, high-speed shootouts, fistfights that leave enemies with freaking buzzsaws in their head, and so much more to keep you entertained, and that's not even getting into the nightlife within Hong Kong and the generally gripping story. Releasing to positive reviews, Sleeping Dogs seemed to be a diamond in the rough when it came to open-world action games. A unique combat and driving style allowed the gameplay to really stand on its own and give it a sense of identity if the masterfully crafted streets of Hong Kong didn't already do that. Couple this with a story that, while cheesy, serves as a love letter to old Hong Kong action flicks and as a solid story in its own right, and we end up with a product that left me puzzled, since it didn't seem to get the love and appreciation I believe it deserves. Sleeping Dogs on its initial release got some coverage on YouTube, but in recent years the coverage has been minimal, so I figure I would take some time to give my own thoughts on the series. Now, to give some context to this entire retrospective, I should also recount my history of the game. I purchased Sleeping Dogs upon release because the trailers leading up to it intrigued me and I absolutely loved it. So much so that I purchased its re-release, which included all of the DLC, Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition. Upon my second playthrough, I took a closer look at the game's narrative and ended up enjoying it much more, though I never dabbled into the DLC. I did, however, take multiple years off from the game. This was because upon replaying a few missions to finish up the game 100%, I encountered a bug where my save file became corrupted and I lost upwards of 40 hours of playtime. I got really butthurt and decided to ditch the game, and I forgot about it for some time. I then purchased the game on Steam with all the DLC included, and that's where all of this footage comes from. I'll be focusing on the performance and presentation based on the PC port, but I might as well mention that the definitive edition for the PS4 performed fine, and the bug with my corrupted save file must have been quite rare because I couldn't find any other post online about it. So without further ado, let's talk about Sleeping Dogs, beginning with the technical aspect of it. Obviously, with a game as old as this, I don't expect cutting-edge graphics, but I must say that the graphical fidelity here is quite good, and the designs of the characters look great. Wei Shen's design in particular stood out to me as he looks both remarkable and unremarkable at the same time. His toned physique gives me the impression that he is obviously quite skilled, but his clothing, while somewhat iconic, doesn't stand out too much. What I liked was that Wei's outfits consist of blue jeans and a blue windbreaker with a white tank top underneath. The typical attire of a triad member, at least in the lower tier, sees them with a tank top. The tank top is part of Wei's ensemble, which could represent his personal connection with the Sun On Yee. This tank top is covered up by a primary color of blue, a color commonly associated with the police. His tank top is being repressed by his coat, the same way his Sun On Yee past is being repressed by his future in law enforcement. Maybe I'm looking too far into this, but I feel that this was too convenient to be unintentional. Wei's design says more about his personality too, such as his tattoos, which are surprisingly symbolic of his character. He sports a tattoo of a dragon and a phoenix. The dragon represents power in Wei's case, and the phoenix is often a symbol of rebirth, and in Chinese culture, it symbolizes luck. In Wei's case, his rebirth was a result of his sister's death. She became addicted to drugs due to the triads and eventually overdosed, which might have been the catalyst for Wei's decision to join law enforcement. Wei also has a tattoo of Guan Yu, a prominent figure from Chinese folklore, playing a large role in the end of the Han Dynasty, and the TLDR is that he was quite loyal and his morals through the passing of time have been accentuated, making him a symbol of loyalty and morality. It makes sense that this is tattooed on Wei, as his loyalty plays a large role in his character, acting as both his biggest strength and his biggest weakness. Other main characters like Dog Eyes, Winston, Uncle Po, Pendrew, and so many others have good designs that fit their personalities, and even the side characters look good too, albeit if their designs are very similar, which could be a testament to the fact that they are just low-level lackeys, but I think the prominent characters could have used some more distinctions. For example, take a look at Conroy, Duke, Vincent, and even Xiao, whose designs blend together in a way that makes it hard to remember them individually. It isn't that big of a deal because these characters are very small by the end of the story, but the beginning of the game had me always getting the names wrong. Fortunately, that's literally the biggest criticism I can throw at this game when it comes to the characters' designs. There's a myriad of cars to rip around in, and while they all look pretty good with the high-class supercars specifically having eccentric designs, which is nice since during high-speed chases you'll be staring at different car designs a lot, when an enemy is chasing you on four wheels, it is not uncommon to see them flat-out spawn in front of you, or in the case of entering the region's many neighborhoods, to see textures slowly loading in. Once you do get into one of the neighborhoods though, you'll see the dense streets full of billboards, bright lights, and a ton of decorations that really sell the idea of being in a populated region. Neon signs tend to light up the world more than the street lights do at night, and while the lighting here isn't the best, even by the standards of the time in which this game was released, it still sells Hong Kong in a fabulous way. During the day, Hong Kong almost looks a little boring because there's such a lack of inorganic illumination, but when the sun sets, it's like Hong Kong really comes to life, and that's something we see within the story too. Unfortunately, not everything here is as polished as it could be, since glitches were quite common, ranging from minor glitches where an NPC was floating for a brief moment upon entering Club Bam Bam, to the more intrusive glitches where upon throwing a knife, there was a slight chance that it would, instead of getting thrown towards the enemy you're aiming at, would just hit Wei in the face, causing an instant game over. I typically don't criticize glitches because they're so on and off for everyone, but this particular knife glitch only happened 3 or so times, but it happened enough to make me hesitant to ever make use of the mechanic. Another thing that stood out to me considering the time this game was released was the faces. They all look really good and really natural. A lot of games from this time, and hell, even games today, have faces that fall into the uncanny valley. However, Sleeping Dogs is not one of those games. With that being said, the lip syncing is pretty rough here. Normally, I wouldn't bring something like this up if it didn't distract me from the cutscenes, but unfortunately, it did. There were a few points where I found myself going, yeesh, that could have used some work.
Wait, listen, I swear! Oh, it's a dirty fucking
And while these moments don't happen too often, especially not often enough to ruin the game, I felt it was necessary to mention. Unfortunately, another large issue I found with the cutscenes on PC was their frame rate was beyond inconsistent. I don't believe that they are capped, because they do hit 60 frames per second, but they often drop frames, and I could not for the life of me figure out why. Right when I got to the gameplay, the frame rate was perfectly stable, and I never experienced any drops. So further apologies if the cutscenes look a little jarring here. What I can say is that these cutscenes, aside from the aforementioned lip syncing, look great and have an excellent flair to them that really immerses you. This of course could not have been achieved without the stellar voice acting in the game. Literally every voice here sounded pretty good barring some of the side quest characters, and I don't want to talk about it too much, but I felt it was necessary to say that the voices of the main characters were great, and if I look at the faces of Wei, Pandrew, Uncle Po, and even some like Sifu and Raymond, their voices immediately come to mind. I think specifically the voice actor for Wei, Will Yun Lee, did such an amazing job capturing the stress, aggression, and confidence that Wei exudes. The narrative has a lot of implications for Wei, and without getting into it too much here, I have to say that the voice actor really sold Wei's emotions. The music also does a great job of setting the tone, as it reflects the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation that Wei is caught in. When policing, he's calm and collected, trying to keep the peace and tranquility. However, undercover, he has to accentuate the aggressive aspects of his personality to fit in. This further reflects on the region itself, as by day it's seemingly normal on the surface, but it's at dusk that the criminals start getting up to no good, and that life is translated perfectly to the soundtrack. Just the menu themes, of which there are 4, alone encompass the themes of this game and Wei as a character. The opening themes typically have a blend of peaceful traditional Chinese instruments before they end up clashing with the hard-hitting trap beats. Some have the two blending together in absolute harmony, with the Chinese instruments and the Western hip-hop working together, paralleling Wei, who is also someone with roots in both Chinese and American culture. Outside of all that though, I'm going to go on record here and say that this original soundtrack is one of the best I've heard from a game like this. Sure, it won't top the likes of the Persona series, but holy dying shit if I didn't bob my head every time I heard these opening themes. The different radio stations in the game have some decent music, but I won't comment on it much because they are all licensed, meaning I can't play them, lest I let UMG rip my kidneys out. Regardless, they were fine. Nothing incredible or even comparable to the original soundtrack, but something to groove to while heading to different objectives around the map. Of course, the map itself is one of the most prominent figures in the game, and where all of this triad turmoil takes place. Now, instead of using GPS technologies to accurately recreate Hong Kong the same way True Crime LA and True Crime New York did, United Front chose to take a more gameplay-focused approach and create their own interpretation of Hong Kong. There's only one Hong Kong island in the game, with the new territories, Kowloon, or any landmarks such as the Hong Kong International Airport or the subway system are all absent. Furthering this, there are only 4 neighborhoods of Hong Kong here, being North Point, Aberdeen, Kennedy Town, and Central, meaning you will also not see the likes of other neighborhoods such as Wan Chai, and despite this, the map still feels full and actually feels like quite a good size. The aforementioned neighborhoods are not in the proper geographical spots, but it doesn't matter because, as established, the map was not meant to be a one-to-one recreation. The first point I should mention is that these 4 neighborhoods are separated by 2 or 3 roads that are very defined, meaning the transition from one neighborhood to the next isn't always going to be seamless. I would have enjoyed a more blended Hong Kong, though I imagine the reason for such a defined separation between the neighborhoods is due to hardware limitations and the need to give the consoles time to load in the new environments. Regardless, I don't want the fact that Hong Kong isn't an accurate recreation to seem like a criticism, because it's not. In fact, I have a lot of praise to give for Hong Kong here. Especially at night, it feels incredibly alive, and the densely packed homes in the slums look just as good as the wide open shopping districts. Since rendering such a dense population would be impossible with the hardware, as hundreds of NPCs per block would need to be rendered, United Front instead reflected the density of Hong Kong within its environment. Take a look at some of the markets in Hong Kong. There's such a small space between one store to the next, and everything, especially in the low-income areas, are packed so neatly and tightly together, and taking a single look up reinforces a claustrophobic feeling as billboards, neon signs, and advertisements cascade your vision with stimulation and an overwhelming amount of logos, names, and it's all very well executed. It's not just the environments here that offer the aesthetic of being overwhelmingly dense, with even the street signs having so much information on it that, when driving, you can't help but squint to make out the words. Furthermore, no wall is left bare here, as there's always a poster, air conditioning unit, or window within it. Or there's trash or a person leaning against it, and while there may not be anything visually appealing about these details on their own, they come together to create a product and a region that is greater and more claustrophobic than the sum of its parts. Seeing so many protrusions over the near entirety of the game beautifully represents the oppressive nature of Hong Kong's criminal underbelly. I think the downside of having such a dense region is that remembering locations relative to each other was tough for me. I always found this strange with Sleeping Dogs because in a lot of open world games such as Saints Row or Grand Theft Auto, I find that by the end of a playthrough, if not earlier, I know the respective cities like the back of my hand. But with Sleeping Dogs, I was more than consistently using my map and using waypoints to get around. I mentioned a similar issue when I covered Assassin's Creed Revelations. The conclusion I drew there as to why Constantinople didn't stick in my mind was because there was a lack of notable landmarks. And I believe this is still true, but for Sleeping Dogs, the landmarks are still there. I can think of many of them off the top of my head as I write this. The Temple, K-Bar, Club Bam Bam, the Night Market in North Point, Wei's many properties, the Golden Koi, and yet everything in between is just gray. A criticism I saw online from a lot of critics and players was that the world felt forgettable. I can see why they feel this way, and while I don't necessarily agree, I think the reason is because of a lack of visible landmarks. I want to make this distinction because, as I mentioned before, there are landmarks here, and it's not the lack of landmarks that's the problem. It's that the landmarks here don't stand out. K-Bar is just a hole in the wall, no bigger than the other businesses surrounding it. Wei's homes are much the same with the exception of his apartment in North Point. Even the night market itself in North Point can be a chore to pinpoint despite it being dead center of the map. If these landmarks were visible from the ground or had some greater distinction, they could be potentially easier to find. On top of that, because everything fits in with this claustrophobic design, it means you have so many things to keep track of and so many signs and buildings grabbing your attention that making the distinction from one building to the next can be tough. But I don't think this is the fault of the game. I think it's just the downside of keeping the setting as authentic as possible. Compare this to the obvious contemporary, Grand Theft Auto 5. In GTA 5, I think the reason I had an easier time memorizing the map was because there were fewer points of interest. There are plenty of landmarks such as the skyscrapers visible downtown, and they always give you an idea of your position in the city. And there are plenty of buildings in between these landmarks, however, these in-between buildings don't catch your eye as much because they lack the foliage that Hong Kong presents. This is not to say that everything in Hong Kong is interesting, but that it is eye-grabbing. Plenty of neon signs and details clutter the screen, and when so much of the screen wants your attention on top of whatever objective is in front of you, none of it gets your attention. I think that's why some have cited the game as being forgettable, because I think there's just too much clutter here. Again, I don't think this is a bad design choice, as aesthetically Hong Kong is absolutely beautiful, but I think it's a product of its inspirations. I find this in particular hard to articulate, as I feel that the aesthetic and the look of Hong Kong is so unique and memorable, but the map itself feels so disorientating at times. And it led to me feeling somewhat unfamiliar with the greater region as a whole for my entire playthrough. I think what doesn't help is that the minimap is so wildly inaccurate at times that it was a consistent annoyance and can barely be relied on. One of the luxuries that such a densely packed region provides is the ability to incorporate movement to a greater extent, and Sleeping Dogs takes advantage of this, but to the most minimal extent possible. There are very defined paths in which you can use your parkour abilities, and they are typically filled with scaffolding or are coated in a green tarp. I can get into more detail on the mechanics of this movement later, but for now I can say that the movement-based environments had a lot of variety, and it was always fun making these massive leaps to get across a gap or chase down a target. Some of these restricted movement sections take place indoors, and these interior environments look even better than their external counterparts. It's clear that a lot of effort went into these environments, and the aforementioned club interiors look amazing on top of others such as the warehouses you enter, and while I could go on about the details, which trust me, I'd love to, I'd rather take a moment to articulate how I feel about these these interiors from a design perspective. The interiors that are combat-centric are varied, interesting, and have a variety of interactable aspects that allow combat to feel as alive as possible. Throwing someone's head into a fish tank and then beating up the next person with a fish from that very tank is something not a lot of games can say they can provide. I can go into detail on environmental takedowns more later, but for now I want to praise that while the game likes to throw a ton of enemies at you, there are plenty of these environmental takedowns present in any given area that allow you to near instantly thin out the numbers. When it comes to the gunplay, there are a variety of environments aesthetically, and they all end up being the same design-wise. A surprising amount of the environments here see you in an open room with a couple of boxes scattered around, and that's about it. To be fair, there are also some really intense set pieces, as exemplified by the shootout in the cemetery, or one of the final set pieces which sees you in a restaurant, vaulting over tables and taking cover behind booths. Overall though, the environments don't really do anything special, and that's perfectly fine in my eyes. Sure, there are some interesting environments like the one on top of a building in the game's opening hour, which see you fighting a very small army of men and slamming them into the skylights to break the glass. Is it fun? Yeah. Is it innovative or even that unique? Not really. But when it comes to combat, I don't really believe it needs to be. The combat alone was interesting enough to keep me engaged, and the environments aesthetically stimulated me too, so I never felt the need or want for more complex level designs when it came to that. If I had to give an idea of what they could do in the context of a sequel, we could use some more moving environments. We could potentially have to stop a convoy of semi-trucks filled with stolen goods, but because the goods are so fragile, we can't just ram the vehicles off the road, meaning we would have to climb on top of them and fight a few goons who have also climbed up, jumping from one truck to the next. It is an ambitious idea for sure, but if executed well, it could be extremely memorable. For now though, let's talk about what they actually did with the gameplay. The gameplay here is really this game's bread and butter, and while it isn't perfect, like everything else in this game, is still pretty damn good. There are many sides to the gameplay, being the movement, the vehicles, the gunplay, and the brawling. However, they all have their own unique flaws and strengths, and they come together under the level design to create something unique and to give this game another sense of identity. I believe the first thing we should cover is the combat, since it is easily the most unique part of this game, for better or worse. Often compared to the Arkham series, the combat here is built on a foundation of attacking and counter-attacking. An aggressive playstyle is recommended here, as all of your abilities that you start with and even the ones you unlock are built around allowing you to pummel an enemy through the use of your fists, a weapon, a car engine, or even an ice chipper. Combining aspects from kung fu, judo, wrestling, and more, the fighting style is heavily inspired by MMA and looks immaculate. And this was by design, as United Front brought in mixed martial artist Georges St. Pierre to lend his knowledge and help United Front create the most satisfying and realistic combat possible. The little details that went into this blew my mind too, such as in an early build of the game. The running jump kick that Wei can perform looked slightly different, and as the developers put it, it felt off. GSP was able to pinpoint that the issue was Wei was kicking the enemy with the same foot he jumps with, which is incorrect. This is just one of the many examples of United Front's dedication to making gameplay that is both cinematic in its style but grounded in its execution. I want to tackle the comparisons to the Arkham series off the bat, since I'm sure there are already a myriad of comments referring to such a comparison. Sleeping Dog's combat relies much more heavily on the surrounding environments compared to Arkham. It also relies on combos much more than Arkham, with mixes of light and heavy attacks, and the face meter also adds a new layer of complexity. Sleeping Dogs also has a different variety of enemies compared to the Arkham games, along with different ways to take them down, such as through grabbing or through the use of weapons like knives and pipes. The only real comparison you could draw is that they both use square for attack and triangle for countering, and it takes varying degrees of rhythm. I'm not saying that Sleeping Dogs wasn't inspired by the Arkham series, and while I can't say for sure that it is, I kinda believe it was. But it is not a ripoff. It took the most boiled down bare bones aspects of the Arkham combat and they put their own twists on it, and built it from the ground up to create something truly unique. Besides, if we really want to paint a game as guilty of plagiarism, then we can at least say that the Arkham series is also guilty, since Arkham Knight took the electrical box environmental takedown straight from this game. I wouldn't say that though, because when both games are combat-based third-person action games, there's going to be some natural overlap. Do not confuse this for a definitive statement on which combat system is better. Truth is, I like them both and for different reasons. Another series this game is often compared to is Grand Theft Auto, and I think this one actually has some ground at a surface level. I mean, both are third-person action crime games that see you driving, shooting, and punching your way through many problems. But I think this comparison is surface level at best, as the city is entirely different, the story takes a different approach with the whole undercover thing, the combat obviously has a lot more depth than Grand Theft Auto, and the shooting has a more cinematic element to it, which further separates it from GTA. To also be fair, I haven't heard many people claim that this is a GTA ripoff or a clone to the same extent that I have heard it with the Arkham series, but I figured it was at least worth mentioning. I'm sorry, I felt that it was necessary to get that out of the way because it seems that whenever there is a counter button in a combat system, it is immediately deemed an Arkham clone, and if it has a dodge button, then those same people cry Dark Souls clone like it's bloody murder. Making these surface level comparisons diminishes the quality and the unique traits of both the systems in each game, and with that, I will finally shut up about it. The combat can be a lot to take in at first if you're not familiar with third-person action games, but in its simplest form, you are tapping the square button to perform light and heavy attacks, while using the triangle button to counter an enemy's attack. The most important thing to nail down with this system right away is that its rhythm is almost always strict. Not frame perfect, but enough that spamming buttons and trying to perform combos too quickly will not get you very far. You have to tap the next button in a combo sequence as the previous one is finished for the best results, and almost every combo consists of tapping square to varying degrees, always finishing with a heavy attack performed by holding square rather than tapping. The different combos only vary based on how many light attacks come before the heavy attack. You can tap square up to 4 times before holding it to finish off with an incredibly satisfying spinning kick, which does the most damage, but you don't necessarily want to go for that all the time. A combo cannot be continued if interrupted by damage, countering, or anything else, and trying to pull off the 5-hit combo will leave you exposed for quite a bit, meaning you'll have to make these judgment calls and sometimes just straight up gambles on whether you should go for the riskier 5-hit combo or a safer 2 or 3-hit combo. To mix this up, we can throw in some grabs, which can be used to stun, throw, or just pummel enemies. Some enemies are tougher and will have their guard up, and grabbing them is a good way to break that guard. You can also use weapons to take down some enemies. These weapons, which can range from butcher knives to fishes, have a set durability, and for good reason as they negate any blocking, so you can just go to town on the opposing triads for a little bit. Alternatively, you can throw your weapon, which will kill anyone it touches, but it will immediately break it. Be careful when doing this though, as it can backfire through the glitch that I mentioned earlier, or if you miss, it can bounce back and hit you, which it has done before in hilarious fashion. To avoid this, you can lock onto an enemy, though this is the only time I found locking on to be particularly useful. I didn't find myself attacking an enemy I didn't want to, as pushing the stick in the direction of the person you want to hit is as accurate as it needs to be. Finally, there are some environmental takedowns, which are easily the coolest part of the combat, as they are both brutal and effective as they instantly take down any enemy. The best part about heading into a new environment was grabbing someone and looking around at what they could be thrown into, and I swear my eyes just lit up like a Christmas tree when I saw an open elevator shaft or a kitchen stove, or better yet, a fish tank. When waltzing into an environment, you'll likely take notice of these interactables, as when grappling an enemy, they become highlighted in red. I think the environmental takedowns are mechanically bare as hell, and they are literally requiring you to press one button. But on the other hand, they don't serve as an easy win all the time, more as a way to thin out the numbers. Not every enemy can be grappled either, so this further restricts the power of these takedowns, which I appreciated. They gave you the upper hand in battle, not the win on a silver platter. The same sentiment rings true for the weapons, as they can easily thin out numbers, keeping the fight in your favor. Yet another tool at your disposal is the face meter. Face, from how it is contextualized in the game, is your reputation within the community. You can raise face through favors, races, and the like, with rewards including things like discounts in stores. The face meter, though, doesn't really reflect that. It instead acts as an adrenaline meter of sorts, and the meter is filled by performing attacks, counters, and just about anything else, and is drained by getting hit. Once full, it is automatically activated and you receive a damage buff, regenerating health, and you can perform any attack on any enemy. So the heavies who can't be grappled, for example, will be grabbable when the face meter is active. Your counters also receive a huge boost. I would say the only criticism I have of the face meter is that it serves as a passive buff rather than an actual tool at our disposal, and that's because we have no control over when it becomes active. Once we do good enough in combat, the meter eventually fills and activates, and while it does in concept translate to a combat system that rewards consistency and momentum, momentum, if you're good enough to not get hit for an extended period of time, which by the end of the game you likely will, you don't need an extra buff. If I'm kicking ass and not getting hit, I don't need the extra health that face mode provides, and the same goes for the damage buff, although to a lesser extent. I think the face meter would have been more useful if we could choose when it becomes active. For example, we could charge the meter through normal use, and upon becoming charged, the meter can no longer go down from getting hit, meaning you could save it for when you're close to death or heavily outnumbered. It would give the player more agency and allow them to make an exceptional comeback, just like the movies. So a trend that you've likely picked up on when listening to all the abilities is that it seems that fights are always heavily in your favor. Sure, it's a 1v5, 10, even 1v15, but you're given just about every advantage you could have, and on top of that, there are further upgrades to your combat abilities. Some basic upgrades will give you damage buffs and allow you to take more hits, but if you progress in a certain side mission, you can eventually obtain entirely new abilities. Within the story, Wei eventually reunites with his old martial arts teacher, Sifu, who's had his collection of 12 jade statues from the Song Dynasty stolen. He was able to recover one of them, but there's still 11 missing, and with each statue that Wei finds and returns, Sifu offers to teach Wei a new combat ability. A lot of these abilities further upgrade some of Wei's base skills, such as his basic combos. If you were to perform a 3-hit heavy combo, Wei will knee the enemy. With one of the upgrades, it'll also stun the enemy and leave them open for a follow-up attack that does insane damage. When grabbing an enemy, you can pummel them and throw them into the ground, but with upgrades, you can break the enemy's leg, which will not only stun him for a long time and open him up for a follow-up attack, but it'll shock the surrounding enemies, leaving them defenseless for a few seconds too. Instead of following up with a basic attack, you could follow up with a grab and slam a guy's skull in. The final upgrade, titled Team Muck, or as my uncultured Canadian ass calls it, Dim Mac, sees Wei trading out his basic counter for a flurry of punches that leaves enemies on the ground and a significant distance away. While I could go over more of these upgrades, I think you all get the point. These upgrades offer alternatives and buffs to your pre-existing abilities. I also appreciated that the jade statues are placed all over the map and in a lot of locations only accessible in the story, meaning you'll experience a natural progression with the combat and you'll be consistently acquiring new moves to keep the combat fresh. I think the AI here is pretty good too, and I enjoy that during some encounters, enemies will just run away and get into the nearest car to make their getaway. It led to an air of realism, but it also led to some funny moments, like the one here where a guy hopped into a car and ran me over on his way out. There are 4 types of enemies to tackle. There are your run-of-the-mill thugs who can be damaged through just about anything, the lanky or high-speed enemies who are capable of dodging attacks, meaning you'll have to stun them with the counter first, the heavyweight brutes who can't be grabbed or stunned and must be taken down with brute force alone and can snag you into a headlock, the grapplers who need to be grabbed in order to become vulnerable, and the specialist enemies that are a slight combination of all of them. I think the enemies here are fun, and while their designs are not as varied as I would have liked, they get the job done. I think it would have been interesting if there was an enemy that was advanced and learned from your last attack. So if you hit them with a basic combo, they would change their stance, and depending on the stance, they would be weak to grabbing, for example, until you hit them with a grab. The final enemy type is the boss fights, which were okay, I guess. I think the interesting set pieces made them more memorable for sure, but it would have been more interesting to see something more complex than just fighting a normal enemy with a large health bar. That's why calling these guys boss fights is a bit of a stretch, but they are presented as such in the narrative. Overall, the combat here is likely the best part of the game, and while on the surface it can seem akin to the Arkham series, the combos, grappling, and environmental takedowns make it more akin to a fighter like Mortal Kombat than anything else. There are some purchasable meals and outfits that can provide bonuses such as health regeneration, damage buffs, and faster focus generation. The meals were useful, but I never felt the need to use them, as I felt the combat without them was a fair challenge for the entire playthrough. Though on the other hand, a man who never eats a pork bun is not really a whole man. There's a large handful of costumes from other games and references to Chinese films, such as Bruce Lee's iconic yellow tracksuit from Game of Death, or Rico Rodriguez's outfit from Just Cause 2. These costumes also have bonuses like extra police experience, access to special moves and weapons, and other special buffs. I'm not gonna sit here and act like these outfits were revolutionary, but I've always enjoyed little things like this, and it's indicative of the passion that went into this game. It was also really funny replaying some of these story missions where the leader of the Sun On Yee is praising Wei's loyalty as he wears an outfit with the words police written on it.
I like the way you think. That's the attitude that makes us strong. Loyalty, discretion used to be more common.
I also appreciate that when in a police uniform, Wei can handcuff enemies, and when stealing a car, he'll flash his badge, legally commandeering it. We should now take a look at the other side of gameplay here, as while slamming someone's head into an electric generator is pretty lethal, I'd argue a bullet is equally such. The gunplay here is in all honesty pretty janky and extremely easy. The gunplay is cover based, though there's one ability we need to look at right off the bat because it is so broken and I have barely any footage of myself not using it. If behind cover, you have the option to vault over your cover. Do this while aiming down sights and you'll enter bullet time, where everything is in slow motion and this slow motion extends based on the amount of kills you get while in the mode. Essentially, you find some cover, vault over, snipe the enemies in the head, and then immediately rinse and repeat until the entire room is taken out. And this method is usable throughout the entire game. Because this is a cover-based shooter, I swear there was literally no gun section that could not be easily cheesed with this, and because the gunplay without such an action-packed vault is so boring, you are basically conditioned to use it all the time. Upgrades can also extend the amount of time you spend in bullet time, so it just gets worse. There are a few reasons why the shooting isn't very enjoyable, assuming you're not using the bullet time. The first we should tackle is the aim assist. I played this game on an Xbox One controller, and while I could have easily played the game on a keyboard and mouse, I always play a game on whatever input device and method is most comfortable for me so I can properly represent the gameplay. Whenever I criticize something performance related, especially when it's on a game console, I get a ton of comments saying that I should just play it on a PC, and while I appreciate that a $3,000 rig can solve all of my problems, I'm a student, and I can't necessarily justify and afford spending a semester's tuition on a gaming machine, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one in this situation. Regardless, this aim assist issue is non-existent on keyboard and mouse, but I'm going to criticize it anyways because there's plenty of people out there who can only afford a console or just prefer to play on console. The aim assist here is broken. I don't mean that it's poorly designed, but that it functions more like an aimbot than anything else. In many cases, it'll just randomly snap across the room to an enemy, and if you're aiming at one enemy and want to swap to another, you'll feel the aim assist really fight you on it, and the resistance can be frustrating at times. The point of aim assist is to assist you, not do the job for you. Here though, the only effort you have to make is to drag the crosshair from their body to their head, and when they die, you can just stop ADSing and ADS again to reset the aim, or just drag the crosshair, but this is very easy once you discover bullet time. Something that's actually funny about this aim assist issue is that despite it being way too strong, you still miss a lot of your shots, but not because your aim is off, but because of the next issue we have. You may notice that depending on the gun you're using, your crosshair changes. Pistols will have a circular crosshair varying in size, and the assault rifles will have a classic cross design. And these are not just visual differences, but they represent your accuracy too. I absolutely cannot stand when there are random inaccuracies in shooters, but it's a normal thing. Even competitive shooters like Valorant have guns that are not pinpoint accurate, but in that case, it's only slightly off. Here, the bullets go wherever they please, and it makes using any weapon at a decent range a chore, since no matter how accurate your shot is, you could just miss a couple of bullets. It left the gunplay feeling really unreliable and inconsistent. This doesn't end up being too frustrating though, because these inaccuracies don't result in death, and that's because the gunfights are a little too easy. Considering the absurd amount of bullets Wei can eat before tapping out and the vaulting bullet time mechanic, you can just vault over cover and despite being exposed and being riddled with bullets, not have to worry at all. I don't think the difficulty has to be adjusted for the fighting though, but a potential hard mode would have been nice. Finally, there's very little variety in the enemies within the shooting segments. Sure, there are brutes, normal enemies, and grapplers alike, but they never do anything aside from shooting. They don't even wear armor. The bullet time also makes the game incredibly easy, but it's also the most interesting part of it. I understand that there isn't much they could do to spice up the gunplay itself, and truth be told, they do spice it up the best they can through the level design, which we can get into later, but for now, the shooting itself is actually pretty lame in a vacuum, but the set pieces and the bullet time save an otherwise uninteresting, stiff, and pretty janky system. The next part of the game that feels a little stiff is the traversal. We can start with the parkour. It's achieved through pressing X at the right time, with poor timing offering sloppy animations and slow speeds. The timing is forgiving and the places where you can free run are linear and typically quite short. It's in a similar vein to the shooting, which is to service a cinematic fantasy more than it is to service engaging gameplay on its own. I think the parkour achieves this. It's never presented as something you use all the time, and it sweetens the action scenes all it needs to. You can of course parkour as much as you want in the world, but unfortunately, the parkour button is mapped to the same button as the sprint, meaning that there will be a handful of times where you're just trying to sprint and Wei will randomly slam himself against an obstacle, haphazardly tumbling over it. Of course, outside of your on-foot movement, you'll be inside a vehicle, and the driving here is pretty different. I don't think it's bad. In fact, I enjoy it a lot. It's a very arcadey system, for lack of a better term, and the driving feels very stiff. Your skills from games like GTA and even arcade-like driving games like Watch Dogs won't translate here, as in contrast, contrast to describing the driving of GTA as driving on ice, Sleeping Dogs feels like you're driving through mud all the time. When riding on bikes, it takes a considerable amount of force to be knocked off, and a lot of vehicles, unless high-end, feel quite slow, which is fine by me, but worth noting. The cars here all feel weighty, and even with the best cars in the game, you don't necessarily feel like you are going all that fast, in contrast to the bikes, which I found to be more enjoyable to drive. The motorcycles are easier to drive at slower speeds, but will be beaten out by an experienced player in a car, and that's because of this game's unique drifting mechanics. The drifting and turning in general is quite finicky. I don't think they're bad, but they did strike me with a strong learning curve, and rather than holding and letting go of the emergency brake like you typically would, you have to tease the brakes and the steering wheel a little bit. Successfully pulling this off was rewarding to me, and it boasted a huge lead in many of the races. I like that they were consistently challenging to pull off, and the timing was different for each car, meaning that by the end of the game I was still struggling to nail it consistently. But to be clear, that's the fault of my skill, not the mechanics. Fortunately, plenty of the game's cinematic elements are presented within vehicles. When shooting a car's tire while driving, the tire will pop and the car will explode, all in slow motion. You can also jump off your motorcycle mid-ride, and while in slow motion, pull out your gun and shoot any surrounding enemies, and even shoot the bike, causing it to also explode. You can also ram vehicles, and after 2 or 3 rounds, a vehicle will flip and explode in incredible fashion, and it's useful for taking out any cops that are tailing you. You can also, and this is the coolest mechanic I swear, jump from your vehicle to another vehicle, which is useful for losing the cops and stealing a faster vehicle on the fly. And I know that this is all wildly unrealistic, but that's the point. It's meant to be akin to those cheesy action movies with explosions and crazy stunts, and it's fucking awesome. The variety of the vehicles wasn't something that blew me away, but there was enough here to satisfy, and some of the top-end cars are really a treat to roll around in. You can purchase these cars from a number of dealerships around Hong Kong, but there wasn't really a reason to. A large majority of the beginning of the story sees you within the tight markets of North Point, and vehicles are not really necessary. Even when they are, you have a default motorcycle that gets you from point A to point B perfectly fine. By the time you move to the more open districts where a relatively fast car is required, you're given a quote-unquote high roller vehicle for free, and that can easily carry you to the end of the game. And if for some reason you want something faster, there's a series of side quests where you can unlock the fastest car for free that comes equipped with miniguns, EMPs, and armor that blows any other car out of the water. So I never found a reason to purchase any vehicles mechanically, but for some, their style may have been reason enough. Boats are here too, but they were nothing special. I wish I had more to say, but the boats play a very small role in the story, and because of that, they're very basic. You can purchase some upgrades to make cars easier to break into, but that's about it. However, since we are on the topic of upgrades, we should now talk about the experience points you gain throughout the game. If you complete all the missions to the best of your ability, you'll likely have close to all of the main upgrades by the end of the game. I found that by the time I finished the main story, I had all the police upgrades, but not the triad upgrades. That's fine, because there's some side missions that can offer more triad XP, but by the time I fully completed the game, I still didn't have enough experience, and replaying these missions offered minimal experience and diminishing returns. Even the 3 DLC expansions didn't provide enough experience, and I'm really confused as to why they did this. I can at least commend the game for having a really good natural progression, but I'm so confused as to how this wasn't noticed. Finally, there is a wanted system in the game that functions similarly to other open world games, where if you commit a crime next to an officer, you'll get a wanted level, and the cops can be outrun or just killed. It was pretty basic and honestly a non-problem most of the time because it was really easy to lose any pursuers. While the gunplay, parkour, and driving were nothing special even by the standards of when this game came out, I think the combat really stood the test of time and is easily this game's bread and butter. Despite a lot of the gameplay being nothing special, the reason this game is so memorable is because of the level design and the elements surrounding the mechanics here, which offers both some of the most memorable set pieces that I've ever played to this day and some of the most frustrating. The level design here is quite interesting because within the main story, the levels are engaging and throw a considerable amount of mix-ups your way. Pairing this with the way the levels are presented under the narrative, and we get main story missions that are expertly crafted. But then we have side missions that are so short and simplistic that I'm surprised they share the same game as the aforementioned main story missions. I think it's important to mention that I am aware and understand that side quests are not meant to be on the same level as main story missions, but the quality of some of these side missions will really raise an eyebrow, and I will comment on them now. The main story missions see you balancing between cop work and triad gigs. Cop missions see you investigating members of the triads and doing more sneaking, bug planting, and typically chasing down thugs. The triad missions lean more into the cinematic elements of the game, as they do see you doing a lot of driving, shooting, and fighting. These main missions always have an intriguing aspect to them, be that the introduction of a new character that you get to know during the mission, an interesting mechanic like planting bugs, karaoke, or some other mischief, or an interesting set piece, like making your way through the destroyed wedding venue, taking out staff in a blood-stained suit. A lot of the levels feel like they are ripped straight out of an action movie, and the different objectives can be a lot of fun. Having to shoot the opposition's cars while an NPC drives yours was a ton of fun for the spectacle, though the near infinitely spawning cars could really pull you out of it. It was also mechanically quite shallow, as you would just aim and hold R1, but fun regardless since it wasn't too abundant. When the roles are reversed and you are chasing someone, it can be pretty immersion breaking when you find that you can't actually destroy the car until the game gives you the objective to do so. Until then, you just have to follow the car to track them down, and if you get ahead of them, you just have to slow down and allow them to catch up. Or you have to take out the surrounding cars multiple times before you can begin taking down the main car, which served as another roadblock. I don't think this is a huge deal, but some of these chase segments went on for a little too long. Other scenes have the same cinematic flash to them, like the wedding I mentioned, and another example of this is the funeral. The rain crashes against the cement as Wei vaults over the gravestones that act as cover. Eventually, a grenade launcher is used to clear a path, and while the scene was absolutely epic, it was again mechanically bare. By this point in the game, you know the overpowered nature of the vault, and coupled with the design of this stage, which consists of gravestone after gravestone, you're basically handed the win on a silver platter. I mean, if you're going into this game for mechanical depth, then the combat is really the only time when you'll be truly satisfied. However, if you're going into this game wanting to experience an undercover cop power fantasy like I did, then I think you'll be able to look past the shallow mechanics. The combat sees you in a handful of interesting backdrops, most with unique environmental takedowns tied to them. The first you'll come across is on top of the market, where you have to take down Ming and his lackeys. Dropping foes into the skylights, shattering glass as they slam into them is beyond satisfying, and the many air conditioning units are just ripe for head carving. The set pieces get crazier and crazier as the story goes on, such as the construction site you work through directly after a scene that sees Wei being tortured to near death. As you walk through leaving bloody footprints, you can toss enemies into elevator shafts, push their heads against a stove, and even later on you can throw a guy in an ice chipper. The combat itself has enough depth to keep you interested throughout multiple playthroughs, but they don't really change the way that you use it all that much. This is satisfied a little in one of the combat-centric DLCs, but we'll get to those later. The gunplay, however, does have some interesting ways in which you perform it in the story, and that's good because it really needed it. For example, there are plenty of times where you are performing shootouts in interesting areas like a hospital or a restaurant, but there are also mix-ups thrown in there like shooting while in a vehicle as mentioned earlier. Since guns are not as accessible as they are in this game's contemporaries, the missions typically dictate what guns you can use, and using a grenade launcher to annihilate enemy forces in North Point is a highlight for sure, and it marks a sharp turn in the narrative. The driving doesn't have many mix-ups, but that's okay because it isn't typically the sole focus of a mission, and the destinations you drive to serve as moments of dialogue between Wei and his connections. While I guess these conversations could occur in a cutscene since the only interesting thing is the conversation itself, having the player drive somewhere keeps them stimulated while they also listen to dialogue. So while the main story missions don't break any new ground, there is a consistent flow of new plot developments, gameplay developments, and matched with the natural acquisition of more upgrades and new abilities, it makes them near constantly engaging and fun. The flip side of this is the side missions. These side missions are a decent distraction at best, and at worst, it's the bane of this game's greatness. Let's first start with the fun distractions. There are a number of games you can participate in, such as chicken fighting, poker, and karaoke, which while not innovative, are fun to try out at least once. There are the fight clubs, which see you taking on wave after wave of enemies. These clubs were consistently rewarding to play through because the enemy numbers hit the double digits very quickly, and with minimal environmental utilities, you are forced to rely on skill alone to take these rings down. It's a good challenge and a good test of your knowledge. Nothing special, but certainly fun. The races are basic, but the issue is not with their simplicity, it's with their AI. The rubber banding on the many cars is a little too strict, and once you pull ahead and get a decent lead, you'll find that the rubber banding just stops, and it was very rare to see myself not in first place on my first attempt, especially with the late game vehicles. Each vehicle is locked to a class based on its overall performance, and these races restrict what class you can use, so it's not like you can bring a supercar to a smart car race, but each class will have a car that is better than the rest. You can't take out cars by ramming them the same way you could in the open world. When ramming pursuers, you could hit them 2 or 3 times and their car car would just explode. But that can't fly here because you could then theoretically make every other car in the race combust. I like that you had to put more thought into ramming, because with the nerfed impact, just ramming a car would not be enough to slow them down. You have to instead ram them into things like obstacles or buildings, which would give you the lead. Though as mentioned before, gaining the lead with some of the late game cars was a piece of cake. The different classes of races are unlocked as you get through the story, and once you finish all of them, there is a final race that is meant to be a final test of sorts. This final race was pretty underwhelming though. There are a number of missions where you can collect a car and deliver it for cash. Some of these are the vans you can find and steal in the open world, and some are the missions for Tang, which see him sending you an address where you have to chase down a car, steal it, and deliver it, and while the idea is fine in itself, the game asks you to do it far too many times. It became boring as hell, and the rewards are always cash, so I wouldn't recommend it. There are plenty of cop missions around Hong Kong which see you changing into your police uniform and taking care of some petty crimes. These are typically shootouts, brawls, or chases. Basic stuff, but good for experience and money. They never did anything too interesting, but fighting with a nightstick and putting the cuffs on these guys was relatively fun, and there was a reasonable amount of these missions too, most of which unlock outfits and vehicles for you to use. Another side mission that sees you fulfilling your police duties are the many drug busts around Hong Kong. These missions were not anything special, but they didn't need to be. What they did need to do was at least entertain the player, and I can't say that was completely achieved. The drug busts see you waltzing into an area, kicking some ass, hacking a camera, and then returning to your apartment to catch a drug deal in the act and have the drug dealer arrested. The best way to handle these was to just hack any cameras you come across, and then upon the main plot forcing you back to your home, do all the drug busts at once. The issue when doing this is that you quickly figure out that the same guy in a black suit is the dealer, and the minigame turns from looking for who the dealer is, which isn't a difficult thing on its own, to an automatic press of the X button on the same character model. It also gets pretty goofy when a bunch of armed individuals are approached by unarmed policemen and they all cower in fear or run away rather than fighting back. The favors located around the map are used to increase your face rank and are pretty simple. These favors include a lot of different tasks that range from humorous getaways to menial deliveries. A few will see your friend Calvin asking for a way to wait for him in a car and then assaulting someone on the street, and our job is to lose the cops. The reasoning for these assaults is usually quite funny, and they were short and few enough to not need any innovation in my eyes.
That asshole was sleeping with my girlfriend!
You can't just punch a cop.
I know! Gotta have a getaway ready. I really appreciate it.
A little warning would be nice.
Oh, right, okay.
You don't pull this shit, you gotta learn to drive. Hey, think about dumping that girlfriend too, alright?
Well, she's not exactly my girlfriend. I really like her though. She's got a nice smile. Dresses real nice.
You're not even dating her?
Not yet, man. Gotta be optimistic though.
Son of a bitch. Is she with that guy?
You mean like right now?
Come on.
I think the only favors that were lame were the muggings. They just see a stranded person asking for help, and then as Wei is fixing the issue, he gets his money stolen and we have to track down the thief. They were typically pretty short, but because your speed and efficiency made no difference in the amount of time it takes to catch the thug, I very quickly started sighing every time I saw a broken down car. I don't want to focus on these favors too much because there is a really good variety of them, and discussing all of them would take too long. The overall takeaway from them is that they allow you to use your abilities in different contexts, and they help to make the region feel alive. There are plenty of people who need help, and the favors, while feeling like busy work, end up being fun in my eyes. It's like doing side missions or collectibles in LEGO games. It's not hard or even very interesting, but it's relaxing, low-stakes busy work that contrasts the intense plot, with the only difference being that LEGO games don't typically have an intense plot. There are plenty of collectibles around Hong Kong that range from health shrines to the jade statues to random red envelopes with money to lock boxes with clothing and cash. They were never something I went out of my way to collect until the end game, and that's because a lot of the story missions will take you to a collectibles location, so they were easy to snag whilst doing something else. What I do appreciate greatly is that the dates you go on lead to the different collectibles being revealed on the map. For example, after finishing the date with Amanda, she'll mention that she's been taking pictures of the health shrines around Hong Kong, and she adds their locations to the map. The dates in general are interesting, but are very shallow, as each woman has a single date tied to them, and potentially another favor, but that's it. We don't really get much from them, and it left me feeling like they were underdeveloped. They see you doing a simple task with your partner and ending the night with heavily implied intercourse, and that's it. You can't even call them after. Amanda is an American tourist, who is an aspiring writer and photographer, who while on her trip to Hong Kong, bumps into Wei Shen, asking for Sifu's martial arts school. This is how we get introduced to Sifu and his collectible jade statues. Amanda isn't necessarily the sharpest tool in the shed, as she, a tourist, willingly gets on a stranger's vehicle to be taken to some back alley martial arts school. Like, have you not seen Taken? This is like rule number 1 of tourism, man! Regardless, your date with her sees you just taking some photos of her, and that's it. You meet Sandra while helping Vivian run some errands, and we find out that she's like a horned dog Sonic the Hedgehog, and during her date, we have to drive fast to satisfy her. Next is Not Ping, the niece of Old Salty Crab, who upon sharing Wei's interest in tech, can be called for a date, and on said date, they can hack some security cameras together. You can probably guess what happens at the end of their date. The next is Tiffany, the hostess of Club Bam Bam. Wei befriends her in order to access the VIP lounge, but you can hang out with her afterwards, which sees you singing karaoke with her at the club. Fun fact about these two, they both become wise about Wei's relationship with one another. Not Ping will scold you in a voicemail for dating Tiffany, and Tiffany will start dating another man. There's a mission tied to this where Wei plants a bug on a local payphone and follows Tiffany to her date. When confronting her about cheating, Tiffany throws Wei's argument back in his face, and the two end up breaking it off. I enjoy that this mission shows how intense Wei's trust issues can be in a relationship and how he can get a little too overbearing. And his detective skills don't really help with that either. I also appreciate that Tiffany is no longer considered essential after this mission, meaning you can run her over. The last girlfriend is Ileana, who works at K-Bar. After assisting her with some harassers, you can take her out on a date where you do some free running behind K-Bar. She then claims that she's been thinking about this for a long time, and the two head to her bedroom. Overall, these girlfriend missions were very underdeveloped, aside from Tiffany and Not Ping. They didn't do much to flesh out the girlfriends or Wei in any meaningful manner. They were useful for revealing the locations of collectibles, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't have minded if the time they put into these dates were put into other side missions instead. I say that because while most of these are at worst boring, some of them are actually infuriating. For example, let's talk about Death by 1000 Cuts. The mission is a little strange because I read online that you can take out endless waves of enemies, but I never really saw that in my playthrough. The version I saw had an objective where you have to kill 30 enemies. The same goes for the Shaolin Tournament mission. Both of these missions were originally DLC, so my best guess is that they were tweaked for the definitive edition. Regardless, the Shaolin Tournament was a lot of fun because the monks are very tough enemies and offered a good challenge. Death by 1000 Cuts, on the other hand, sucked so hard. You're in a lot, and there are 30 enemies you need to take out, but only up to 5 will be in the lot at a single time. You're given a golden, indestructible cleaver, but all the enemies also have knives. The twist is, the knives are poisonous, meaning that just one hit will start a decay effect leading to Wei's inevitable death, with each subsequent hit speeding up the process. Fortunately, for every 10 enemies you kill, you will get some health back. The issue is that this fight is terribly hard, and not for the game overwhelming you with enemies, but because of the strangely inconsistent hitboxes. On a lot of occasions, upon dodging blades, you won't take the hit, but you will still be hit with the poison, and the poison will kill you easily before you can finish off the 30 enemies, and that's assuming you don't get hit at all after that. I know that this isn't an issue with just my copy, because my girlfriend on her computer experienced the exact same thing. I was only able to complete the mission by running around, picking up weapons, and then throwing them at the enemies, essentially cheesing it. I don't really want to go too in-depth on this mission because in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. But my god, if this didn't piss me off to the nth degree, and it really highlights how janky this game's combat can be. There's also a string of side missions surrounding Dr. Tang as he builds a supercar. They see you picking up parts for the vehicle and testing out said parts such as a EMP, the turrets, and the self-driving systems. It was interesting enough and you were rewarded with the finished car, which is easily the best in the game. The series of time trials unlocked after completing the string isn't the best, because they see you just destroying a certain amount of cars within a time limit, and there are way too many of these given how shallow the concept is. In most of these, you don't even have to drive the car, it's just point and shoot. So overall, these missions were at best okay. I didn't talk about a lot of them as mentioned because of their simplistic and repetitive nature, but I think I got the ones I had a lot to say for. A lot of these side missions will have you going across a map a few times, so having the taxis that work as fast travels was really convenient and a welcome feature. It just really sucks that these missions were so underdeveloped compared to the main story missions, which felt expertly crafted. I think when it came to the side quests, we got quantity over quality for most of them, and while the gameplay is seemingly good enough to carry these side quests, it can't, and by the time you really get into these bad boys, you'll find that you're just bored, or in a lot of cases, frustrated. and it serves as some of the worst parts of the game. Sure, you don't have to play side missions, but despite being in love with the main plot and so many other aspects of this game, I have to give criticism where it's due. I want to clarify that I don't think the side quests are that bad. In fact, I wouldn't even say a majority of them are bad, just that they're a little uninspired. I don't like using the word uninspired because I think it's a little vague, but that's the word that comes to mind when thinking of these side quests, and while it doesn't change the fact that I think Sleeping Dogs is awesome, it does disappoint when compared to the other aspects of this game. The main missions were obviously exempt from these criticisms as they saw you in interesting locations doing interesting things, and because the missions furthered and expanded the plot of this game, which in my eyes was the best part, it's where we should avert our eyes next. As I've mentioned, the story here is the best part of the game, and while it may not be the most original story, and while its influences are worn clearly on its sleeve, it doesn't change the fact that it's a story truly unique to this medium, and its execution and the way it interweaves with the gameplay elevates its impact so much more. So let's start with a summary. The game begins in Hong Kong, with Wei Shen and a fellow undercover officer Naz attempting to infiltrate the triads of Hong Kong. Wei has been presumably in Hong Kong for a little while, but has yet to find any infiltration routes. Originally from Hong Kong, Wei and his family moved to San Francisco to start a new life after Wei's sister became addicted to drugs. This addiction was unfortunately not broken, and Wei's sister ended up dying of an overdose. The deal that him and Naz are in goes awry, and Wei is caught. Though when in a prison cell, he meets with a childhood friend from Old Prosperity, Jackie Ma. Jackie is a kind, lighthearted member of the Sun On Yee and offers to introduce Wei to the rest of the Water Street gang, and subsequently their leader, Winston, who is a red pole. A quick tangent about triad hierarchy. It's a little complicated, but for the sake of simplicity and because the game doesn't go too in depth with it, I'll lay it out like this. This combines information given from the game and the information about the triads in which the Sun On Yee is based on, the Sun Yee On. At the bottom of the food chain we have the associates. These are uninitiated members that help the Sun On Yee in some way. For example, Winston's mother, while not directly involved with the crime, does feed and encourage Winston and his allies and allows them to plan their next move within her establishment. A step up from that are the initiated members, which include those like Conroy, who are established foot soldiers that do the dirty work, but only after the initiation process is complete. Up from there we get the red poles. The red poles oversee the foot soldiers and are akin to supervisors. Being the penultimate rank, they report to the dragon head, or more commonly known as the chairman. The chairman is the highest attainable rank and is essentially the big cheese, and is the de facto leader of the Sun On Yee. So Wei's goal, now that he has a way into the Sun On Yee, is to discover the identities and locations of the members, gain their trust, collect evidence, and set them up to be taken in by the police. Before he gets out of prison, of which he spent a short amount of time in, he meets back with his superintendent, Thomas Pendrew, and his handler, Raymond, who explains that Wei is entering into unfamiliar territory with these gangs, as they are not like the ones in San Francisco, hinting that Wei has done an operation like this before, explaining his skill in combat, quick talking, and assimilation. Wei then meets up with Jackie, who gives him the rundown on where Wei's childhood comrades are. Dog Eyes and Winston are red poles, and we find out that Wei and Dog Eyes have a bit of history with one another, as it's revealed that Dog Eyes was the one who got Wei's sister hooked on drugs. When entering the Golden Koi, Wei becomes acquainted with the rest of the crew, and his abrasive nature rubs him the wrong way. Winston scolds Jackie for bringing in an outsider, but upon being reminded of who Wei is through the memory of his sister, Winston allows him to collect payments from the market. Before we leave though, Conroy and the gang decide to test Wei's fighting abilities, but Dog Eyes shows up. Throughout this conversation, we see that despite their agreements, Dog Eyes is attempting to gain control of the night market, which is Winston's territory. After collecting payments, we become informed of one of Winston's men betraying him. We set the record straight and get caught by the police. As we become interrogated by Inspector Tang, we get more insight into Wei's history in San Francisco, and Pendrew blows Wei's cover, leading to an outburst from Wei.
For God's sake, Tang, he's one of us.
What? Jesus, Pendrew, let me get the door. There are a few badges outside who didn't hear you.
It's all right, Wei. We can trust her.
Trust her? I just met her.
Congratulations.
We get out and help Jackie steal some watches that turn out to be fake, all in an effort to move up the ranks in Winston's crew. We take care of the bus route and make a pit stop at the police station, where we make amends with Inspector Tang and offer our assistance in the many cases around Hong Kong, which we will be doing in between our triad duties. We then return to the Golden Koi. Winston mentions that an associate named Benny has started working for Dog Eyes, and Wei needs to head to Club Bam Bam to set the record straight, earning more of Winston's trust. Wei then meets back at the Golden Koi and gets accused of being a rat, and I absolutely love this scene for a few reasons. The first is that Wei is typically a fast talker and quick-witted, but here he fumbles a bit because it catches him so off guard. His deductive skills allow him to very quickly turn the tables on Ming, who is accusing him of being a cop.
He ratted out pop star, Winston. I know he did.
All you gonna do to what? This motherfucker right here's a snitch.
Is that right, Ming?
You fucking rat. I sent you to pop star, but now he's in jail.
Yeah? And who stands to gain the most from that? You're gonna take over Popstar's whole ketamine racket now. No more scraps for you. You'll supply the whole city with drugs. You and Dog Eyes. Popstar's gone, but you're still dealing, aren't you? So who's supplying you?
We then meet up with Inspector Tang and investigate a racing circuit where the champion Hotshot has been on a killing spree, but it gets quickly pushed to the side when Winston orders us to destroy Dog Eyes' sweatshop, as a retaliation to Dog Eyes shooting up the Golden Koi. This job is very important because the owner is initially meant to be killed, but Wei, wanting to avoid collateral damage and killing in general, persuades Winston to let Wei bring him in alive so he can work for the Water Street Gang. This is one of the many instances where Wei presents a beneficial route that includes not killing anyone, keeping his cover intact and his morals. The rest of the crew becomes suspicious though, and uses this job as a test to see if he is not a cop, and they force Wei to kill. After Wei does that, the full trust of the gang is acquired. Unfortunately, the warehouse explosion caught the attention of the Dragon Head, Uncle Po, who is voiced by James Hong, who also played Po's dad in Kung Fu Panda. I won't ever be able to get that image out of my head, and now, neither will you. Uncle Po praises Wei and Winston's actions and offers him better paying work, which we complete for him. On the way, we acquaint ourselves with a gentleman named Ricky. When we meet up with Raymond, who concludes that our actions have been too high scale and it risks the integrity of the police force, Raymond decides to pull the plug, but quickly backpedals once Wei informs him of his meeting with the chairman.
Wait, you're just a foot soldier.
Well, this foot soldier has just been marked for promotion because I made sure Suwal got out safely. It'll be in my report, and maybe this time you'll actually read it.
We then get word of Winston and Peggy's upcoming wedding. We take Peggy to get her wedding dress and even head to a temple in order to grab a rare flower that ensures the couple will stay together for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, while everyone's inside and Wei is outside grabbing wine for Uncle Po, the wedding's guest of honor, we hear screaming and gunfire. Seeing that the waiters have started massacring the entire wedding, Wei fights for his life, and as he gets through, he sees Winston and Peggy dead. As Wei continues to evacuate anyone left standing, he finds a critically injured Uncle Po and carries him to a nearby hospital, referring to him as his own uncle, which is important to remember. Wei meets with Raymond again, where he expresses more concern of Wei becoming too attached, but Wei reveals that he can't be pulled out because with Winston gone, Wei has to take his place.
Your job was to get close to Winston. Now that's not much of a strategy anymore.
Get close to... Open your eyes, Raymond. I am Winston now. With him gone, I'll be taking his place. You want the chairman? I report to him now. You want the Red Poles? I'm one of them.
That's what worries me, Wei. You're one of them.
Returning to Club Bam Bam and theorizing who could have been behind the attack at the wedding, we receive an offer from Big Smile Lee, another Red Pole who, upon taking notice of the power vacuum and the death of Winston, asks that the Water Street Gang turn all profits over to him. All of this was delivered through Lee's messenger, Ponytail. Wei doesn't take that well, and it leads to a shootout outside of the club, and eventually a hand-to-hand confrontation with Ponytail, and while outrunning the cops, Wei is saved by Broken Nose Jang, another Red Pole. She explains that with Uncle Po in critical condition, Big Smile Lee and the other Red Poles will be looking to fill the role of the Dragon Head. Because if they do not have a defined leader, the 18K, a rival gang, will attempt to go on the attack. Big Smile Lee plans to rely on human trafficking and other unethical adventures for profit, while Jang wants to take a more ethical approach, and asks for Wei's help. Upon helping Jackie with a payment issue and dealing with a slight loose end, Nas, who is deemed a threat to Wei's identity, we return to the Golden Koi to see Winston's mother, and we turn off the bug that we planted earlier for privacy's sake. At the wedding, Wei recognized Johnny Ratface, a member of the 18K, and upon being tortured by Winston's mother, he reveals that Dog Eyes was behind the wedding. After finding him and bringing him to Mrs. Chu, she feeds him some of her specialty stew, but then reveals that the meat in it is actually from the corpse of Johnny Ratface, which, holy shit, is so awesome and so brutal at the same time. She then kills Dog Eyes, and Wei leaves to meet with the other Red Poles in Uncle Po's room, where Uncle Po initiates Wei as a Red Pole. All he has to do is track down a drug dealer. Uncle Po also requests that while he is recovering, someone becomes a temporary chairman. As Big Smile Lee is about to volunteer, Jang steps in and recommends Tuchin, as he is post-blood. As a red pole, Wei has the ability to initiate Jackie as a full member of the Sun On Yee, and to celebrate they track down that drug dealer together. As Wei is fighting him though, the drug dealer pulls out a gun, but Jackie saves Wei by shooting the drug dealer in the back of the head. This leaves Jackie traumatized as we find out that this was his first kill. This begins an arc for Jackie where he reconsiders the gang life and questions if it's really what he wants. After initiation, Wei meets with Raymond again and informs Wei that he must investigate Sunny Wo, an entertainment manager, and while not a member of the Sun On Yee, is a revenue stream and therefore a target. Raymond also mentions that they are taking Jackie in, despite Wei's pleas. Jackie's arrested after doing a job with Wei, and he even covers for him too. But before we can dwell on that for long, Wei gets a call from Ricky saying that the hospital is being shot up by the 18K, and that they are gunning for Uncle Po. After fighting with Ricky, their bond deepens enough to the point where he offers to introduce Wei to Sunny. With Tuchin getting too comfortable as temporary chairman, Jang asks that we sabotage his house to make him believe that he is not fit as a leader, and this works. Now there will have to be an election to see if the chairman becomes Jang or Lee. Wei is then instructed by Sunny to plant a camera in Vivian's apartment, and while all this is happening, Uncle Po dies, and Pendrew explains that Wei's work here is done. Wei, knowing that if he pulls out now, the Sun On Yee will be under the control of Big Smile Lee, making it worse than ever, tries to let him know that there's more work that needs to be done. Wei explains that he'll only give Pendrew the evidence he needs to put Sunny away if Jackie is able to walk free. Pendrew doesn't like Wei's deal, and while he does release Jackie, he also reveals to the 18K the location of Uncle Po's funeral, and he blows Wei's cover to Big Smile Lee, who kidnaps Jackie to draw out Wei. When Wei rescues Jackie, Jackie is contemplating the gang life even more and comes to the conclusion that he wants out. Wei plans to meet up with Jackie the next day and finds him dead. In the shock and confusion, Wei is knocked out and is being tortured by an assassin named Mr. Tong, but Wei escapes and kills him. Wei picks up Tong's phone and sees that Jang is next on the hit list, and Lee just plans to assassinate anyone in his way. As he tracks down Big Smile Lee, we confront Ponytail again, and despite my expectations of him having a boss battle, he just goes down without a cutscene or anything, as if to show the player how you are here for Lee and nothing else. We chase Lee down, and after a boat chase, blowing up a barge, and fighting him with everything he has, Wei throws Lee in an ice chipper. Wei later meets up with Raymond and tries to explain that Pendrew is crooked and sold him out, but it doesn't matter because he's been promoted and there's no evidence against him. That is until a few months later, where Wei receives an envelope with a USB drive that contains camera footage of Pendrew lethally injecting Uncle Po. Wei uses this to put Pendrew away for life, in a prison he spent his entire career putting Sun On Yee members into. Wei then speaks with Inspector Tang, who thanks him, and he thanks her in return for allowing him to feel good about himself through those cop jobs. He explains that he doesn't really have anywhere to go and that Hong Kong feels like home, to which Tang responds with a very memorable line.
But which Hong Kong, officer?
We then see that Broken Nose Jang is watching Wei from a distance, and she exclaims that Wei should be left alone because in one way or another, he was loyal to her. The first thing I have to commend the story on is the pacing and the way it intertwines with the gameplay and the little interactions. The game does everything it needs to in order to set the stakes early and effectively. Wei and Jackie's catching up is not only explaining Wei's personal ties to the Sun On Yee, but it also builds his friendship with Jackie, all while feeling natural. All of the characters' introductions make sense and, as mentioned before, feel natural, and this goes for Dog Eyes too. I appreciate how Wei conveniently moves up in the world. As he completes police cases and takes out Sun On Yee members, most that are above him, he ends up taking their place in one way or another. He gets more properties, each becoming more lavish than the last, and his Sun On Yee actions and traits become more and more genuine.
I'm Sun On Yee, motherfucker. Now get out of here before I break every bone in your body.
Oh man, no, sorry, I didn't know who you were.
His attachment grows throughout the game, and the biggest indicator of that is in one of the final police missions where, in a discussion with Tang, we see Wei get defensive about the gang members.
You think HKPD puts a lot of effort into solving dead gangsters?
So what, they're not people now?
When visiting Mrs. Chu after Winston's death, we see that Wei turns off the bug that he planted earlier, I assume in an attempt to give the family some privacy. This is certainly a product of his time with the gang and finding out that a lot of them, like Winston and Jackie, are not bad people, but that this life is basically all they have known since a young age. The police missions are done in between the groups of triad missions, and there's a balance between cop missions and triad missions in the beginning, but by the time the game comes to a close, that balance is completely out of whack. You start start focusing more on the triad missions, not only because, fortunately, they are more interesting than the cop missions, but because Wei himself is getting further attached. I think a real turning point in his transition is the wedding. Notice how when Wei enters the hospital, he refers to Po as his uncle.
Are you gonna take care of my uncle? And if anything happens to him, I'm holding you personally responsible.
Oh, thank God.
Police work takes a backseat even further after these developments. To be fair, this could also be a matter of his role in the Sun On Yee increasing, which would require more attention from him. As Wei continues to rise in the ranks, he becomes more immersed in the gang lifestyle, even boasting at points to certain individuals that he's Sun On Yee, and that he's not to be trifled with.
Who are you?
Wei Shen, motherfucker, who you?
All of this lines up with Wei's act, which as mentioned before, becomes less of an act as the game goes on. The subtlety of this is lessened by the meetings with Raymond, as they on multiple occasions explain that Wei is becoming one of them, but it's a minor criticism. Wei seems to have a tough demeanor and uses simple aggression to allow the others to take him seriously. When he first meets the gang, I noticed the way he brushed past one of Winston's men, bumping him on the shoulder. To me, this was Wei putting on the tough guy persona typically associated with gang life. He's acting as though he's above these foot soldiers, making him the first to come to mind when a higher up spot needs to be filled. This continues as Wei takes greater initiative with Winston, advising him on the best way to deal with the opposition such as Su Wa, who Wei convinces Winston to take in alive rather than kill. This fast thinking works perfectly because not only does it not impact Uncle Po, but it also prevents unnecessary death, something Wei becomes less concerned with as the game goes on. You may notice that in the beginning, Wei finds many excuses not to kill, but by the time the end of the game comes around, even things like the objectives will change to reflect Wei's mental state. Typically, your objective will say kill X, but when taking down Big Smiley's men, notice how it says slaughter. Wei's done with keeping the peace. At this point, he is full on triad and the objectives reflect that changing mindset. I mentioned earlier how Ponytail goes down without even a cutscene compared to his foes like Ming, who despite being a small fry, at least got a chase in a cutscene. I think that's because at this point, Wei doesn't care about Ponytail, the police, Lee's men, or anything else. He wants Lee on a silver platter. Of course, I can't blame such a mindset, especially when finding out that not only has your superior betrayed you, but then to see your best friend dead. Wei's relationship with Jackie is one that I felt was well done, even if it didn't always feel real. What I mean by real is that it seemed as though Wei actually cares for Jackie, especially due to Jackie's good heart, but Wei, in order to keep up appearances, is often cold to him, such as in a scene where they are about to depart on a job.
Unless we get caught. Well, we won't unless you fuck it up. Come on, get in.
His cold and abrasive delivery makes it seem as though he's intentionally acting as Jackie's superior. Jackie's one of the most tragic characters in this game. From the moment we meet him, Jackie is shown as almost innocent and kind-hearted. He's lived his life in search of the romanticized gang life in the movies, but all he finds are small side hustles, and whenever there's real danger, he panics. I'm not going to sit here and criticize Jackie for being this way, because believe me, if I have hundreds of bullets coming in my direction, I'm going to roll over and cry like a baby. But what I'm trying to say is, Jackie, like myself and I'm sure many others, is just not cut out for this life. The reason that this is so unfortunate is that this life is all he knows. He doesn't have any credentials outside of performing menial tasks as a grunt in organized crime. Not exactly something you can put on a resume. His realization that death is the only thing that waits for him in a life like this is natural, and mixed with his good heart and the guilt and immediate shock of knowing he just ended someone else's life, it eats away at him. He lived as a pawn and died as one too, right as he was about to turn his life around. His life was spent being Winston's minion, and his death only served to make his arguably closest friend vulnerable. What's worse in my eyes is his lines after Wei saves him from being buried alive.
Man, fuck! I thought I was gonna die like an animal, man. Fucking like a dog or something.
And that terrified him. Poetically, Jackie's eventual demise sees him strung up and gutted, just like a pig in a butcher shop. Like an animal. Jackie is, in my eyes, what Wei would have ended up like if he didn't adapt his personality to the triads. Both don't really want to hurt anyone and just want to get by, but Jackie's refusal to leave his albeit at times questionable good heart leads him to death. Meanwhile, the reason Wei escapes that life is by giving in to that near animalistic rage and disregarding every moral he has. When his mindset shifts from killing to slaughtering, he dehumanizes these people, because only an animal could commit such acts against someone who is ultimately innocent. A similar sentiment is true for Winston, who has a good heart to an extent, and while his temper does get the best of him, no amount of hot-headedness justifies killing someone and their wife on their wedding day. Hell, Jackie wouldn't even have been killed had it not been for Pendrew. the game's ultimate villain. There are plenty of antagonists in the story here, and they evolve with the stakes. Dog Eyes at the end of the day was just a low-level red pole, so small in comparison to the next antagonist, Big Smile Lee, and even smaller when compared to the last, Pendrew. The reason I call Pendrew the villain is because unlike other antagonists, Pendrew is constantly working behind the scenes to orchestrate the many roadblocks in Wei's path. And while he isn't the direct cause of Jackie's death, he did give Lee all the information he needed to kill Wei and find Jackie. I also appreciate that Pendrew isn't killed by Wei, but rather through the help of Jang is put in prison to rot and potentially be killed by the triad members he put away. To further explain Pendrew's master plan, the entire lore is that earlier in the Sun On Yee's lifespan, there were 3 tigers, who were leaders of the Sun On Yee. Uncle Po, who was a red pole at the time, struck a deal with Pendrew. Po sold out the 3 tigers for Pendrew to arrest them, allowing Pendrew to receive a hefty promotion and for Po to rise to the role of chairman, while receiving immunity from the police. Further meetings between the two showed that they agreed that Pendrew would not investigate Po, and in return, Po would keep public violence to a minimum. Years later, violence was rising in the Sun On Yee with the brewing civil war, and Pendrew assigned an undercover cop, but he was caught and killed. This is why the triad members are very skeptical of Wei's legitimacy at multiple points. Pendrew then tried again with Wei, and we all know how that went. His murder of Po was him tying up loose ends, and it was revealed that Wei was meant to be killed due to how closely attached he was becoming. Another thing I appreciated about the ending is that Wei doesn't really win. Sure, Pendrew is put away and any other antagonist is dead, but at what cost? His friends were killed like lambs to the slaughter. He has a conscience with guilt and trauma riddled throughout it. And as we've been shown in the Year of the Snake DLC, he gets the short end of the stick at the Force due to his reckless actions. The only reward he really gets is some satisfaction in his life, and he only gets that because of his unwavering loyalty, even when behind a deceptive task. The upside is that if Jang holds her word, the Sun On Yee will take a new path, in an attempt to make more ethical profits, albeit still illegal. I find myself torn to an extent when it comes to Wei as a character. Wei doesn't really have any character growth throughout the game, or at least from what I could see. When the game begins, he is charming, intelligent, an expert in operating vehicles, firearms, and his fists, and he does just about everything first try without really making any mistakes. While on one hand, I would have liked a character with more growth, but on the other hand, there are very good reasons for Wei being this seemingly perfect, and his growth isn't necessarily in his personality but rather in his relationships. I also understand that there are plenty of plot points, characters, and tropes that are heavily inspired by Chinese cop movies, and that's the best way to experience the story in my eyes. It's a romanticized movie in the same vein that the Uncharted games are. Internal Affairs was a heavy inspiration for the game, and the cheesy execution goes even more over the top in the Zodiac Tournament, one of the game's many DLCs. So even if Wei doesn't satisfy me entirely, the surrounding cast certainly does. Mrs. Chu is just one of the many examples of a side character that has a good amount of depth even when they are ultimately insignificant in the grand scheme of the plot. The way she reflects on Winston's life and realizes that she encouraged him to get into the life that ultimately left him dead was heart-wrenching and human. Though her brutality is shown to be even worse than that of her sons, as she tortures and kills those responsible for her son's death. The plot with Ricky and Vivian was equally enjoyable, but this video is long enough and I don't have much to say about it. I just thought it was good. What makes the plot the most enjoyable for me is the little details. The poetic death of Jackie being slaughtered like an animal has the same sentiment that Winston and Peggy's death has. Wei makes an effort to grab Peggy a special plant that is said to ensure the couple stays together for the rest of their lives. And as we know, this works, and the two, still in love on the day of their wedding, die in each other's arms. I also found that the length of the story was perfect. Enough time is spent working the streets that we as the player are able to form the proper connections with the characters, and yet by the end of the 10-hour story, it feels as though so much has happened. I think that this is because there is a consistent level of quality and that every scene and mission in the game is necessary. The delivery and execution of the plot is why I believe it's so good, and almost every plot thread is tied up. I would have liked a funeral scene for Jackie, but I also imagine it isn't necessarily easy to show up to Jackie's funeral where all of his triad friends are. Overall, the narrative isn't super complex, but its execution is really where the quality lies. I won't sit here and act like the story is the best I've ever experienced, but the sheer quality of the story and the consistency of it is fantastic, and it makes it one of the most memorable that I've ever played. What makes it better is the foreshadowing that precedes some of the major twists, deaths, and turns in the story, making a second playthrough well justified. Though a New Game Plus would have done the game some massive favors for not only further incentivizing a second playthrough, but for allowing the player to max out their stats. The plot had a likable cast and all the qualities I already mentioned, and that's why it's been generally praised across the board. Despite poor sales, United Front was able to squeeze out some DLC content for the game, some of which being good and others being ultimately boring. A lot of the smaller pieces of DLC, such as the outfits, were obviously included with the definitive edition and as such were already talked about, but the 3 separate DLC campaigns have been left out because they are very disconnected from the main game, hence why I've waited to talk about them until now. The first DLC campaign that was released in October of 2012 is titled Nightmare on North Point, and the story goes like this. Not Ping and Wei are on a date when Not Ping is kidnapped by Smiley Cat, who is Big Scar Wu. Big Scar Wu was a man who was executed by the Sun On Yee, and his body was ground up into cat food, hence the Smiley Cat name. Smiley Cat, a name that he hates by the way, summoned some old foes like Dog Eyes, Ponytail, and Johnny Ratface to stop Wei from saving Not Ping. Wei can't do any damage to them though until he drinks a special tea, and upon doing so can take down the ghostly foes. When taking down Ponytail, he reveals that the only way to defeat Smiley Cat is to burn his finger, which is the last remaining body part of his, tying him to the real world. We defeat a few more goons and then take Smiley down in normal boss fight fashion. As we rescue Not Ping, we go to finish our date, but she stares back at the camera with a glowing gaze. Story-wise, there isn't much to this DLC, but to me, that's okay. When it comes to a content pack like this, where it's advertised as a Halloween event more than anything, I'm heading in for the gameplay. That doesn't mean that the game doesn't try to do some interesting things with its premise, such as with Vincent, a character you likely forgot about from the main game. He was just a random foot soldier in the Water Street gang, and unfortunately, that's what makes his story compelling. He's essentially a forgotten ghost, and in the underworld, not having things brought to your grave is pretty sad. Vincent remembers not caring about that stuff in his lifetime, and he found out that he was terribly wrong. I would have enjoyed a more expanded subplot surrounding this, and I was also confused to have not seen either Winston or Jackie because they were some of the hardest hitting deaths in the main storyline. There are a few gameplay changes that have been made, and while they are minor, they are enjoyable enough to satisfy for this DLC's short runtime. Wei's face meter is now substituted for his supernatural powers. It doesn't change much, but your finishers have a greater flair to them. The new enemies here, the Jiang Shi, have to be beaten down and grappled in order to be destroyed. They weren't anything too interesting, but the larger enemies at least took some more effort. These guys can only be damaged when the new face meter is active, and while I appreciate the added layer of complexity as you have to farm the lackeys before you can take down the big guys, I ultimately didn't feel very engaged by this concept, since you're basically forced to farm the small enemies with basic attacks only to do the exact same to the big guy. Fortunately, there is a sword that you can use, and this is absolutely awesome, and the takedowns associated with it is great too. As far as the combat goes, there wasn't anything mechanically interesting about it that wasn't at least present in the main game, aside from the finisher, which mind you is the same animation over and over. I don't know if I'd say that I'm disappointed by it, but rather underwhelmed. The best way to exemplify this would be by mentioning the boss fight against Smiley Cat, which was over and done with so quickly I'm surprised it even fit here. There are a few side missions here if you want to call them that, and they consist of collectibles, random patrols of the Jiang Shi, and favors. The favors though are just a bunch of enemies surrounding a pedestrian, and when you take them out they casually run away and just say thanks. I've talked a lot about DLC done right in a few videos now, and a lot of you have started asking me what I define as DLC done wrong. This so far is the worst DLC I've talked about on my channel. I found it generally pretty boring and underwhelming as a whole. While I can appreciate the new excuse to jump back into Hong Kong, that's about where the appreciation ends. The next major DLC to be released was the Zodiac Tournament, which is easily the most inspired of the three. The story is simple. Wei is tasked with investigating an illegal fighting tournament on Zodiac Island. Tang was able to secure Wei an invite as a competitor. He meets with Dr. Zhang, and he explains that the island consists of the best of the best. After working your way around the island and brutally defeating your opponents, the remaining fighters are pitted against one another in a battle to the death, and when they refuse, Zhang reveals a booby-trapped ceiling with spikes on it. Wei defeats his opponents and then murders Zhang, which while not very serving and protecting of him, does put an end to the story. The aesthetic here is just oozing with style and homage, most notably to Enter the Dragon, and it shows. As you fight through the different competitors, you'll find a soundtrack reminiscent of said films, and the title cards that introduce the main characters are as charming as it gets. I could gush about the presentation here more, but I think the footage here speaks for itself. The gameplay here is quite basic, functioning more as a boss rush than anything else. Zodiac Island, much like this DLC as a whole, is quite small, and the majority of your time here will be spent in combat. The different scenarios you find yourselves in and the more tactile bosses were entertaining enough, but I couldn't help myself from wanting more. The boss fights function similarly to others in the main game, but I really appreciated the final encounter with the competitors under the booby-trapped roof. In order to stop the roof from lowering and give yourself enough time to defeat everyone, you have to, and now thinking about it, this is really brutal, you have to throw someone into the gears pulling the roof down and use their body to jam it. This was a neat gameplay twist and took me a few tries to nail down. It was pretty short to be fair, but I did enjoy it more than Nightmare on North Point. Even the side quests are shorter, which are only a few statues which offer trivia about different fighting styles. If you collect all of them, you get a special outfit that supposedly gives you a special combat move, similar to how the George's outfit gave you the flying punch, but I could not get it to work for the life of me. The island itself was perfectly fine too, but the booby traps that got in the way served more as a pain in the neck than anything else. The final DLC campaign that was released is The Year of the Snake, and this one, unlike the others, directly follows the events of the main game and isn't a side story. Not that the side stories are bad, but that I was craving more of the grounded story that we saw in the main game. The story surrounds Wei after the events of the first game, still working with the Hong Kong Police Department. The first thing that I appreciate is that Wei is forced to work punishment duty for the chaos he caused in the events of the main game. Something I initially wanted to criticize the plot for was the lack of police consequences for Wei, but I like that we have an answer for that here. While Wei is taking care of petty crimes, he discovers a terrorist cult planning to destroy Hong Kong as the clock strikes 12 on New Year's. He first discovers this plot by discovering a car bomb, and despite his dispatcher's many pleas to stay put, he drives the car into the ocean, saving many lives. This is just one aspect of how Wei, while having good intentions, doesn't necessarily play by the rules. As Wei deals with the different bombs around the region, he eventually uncovers the identity and location of the headmaster, and upon taking him down, the clock strikes midnight and we see that no bombs have gone off. I'm gonna keep it 100% with you guys. I could not care less for this DLC. The storyline was, outside of the first 10 minutes, so forgettable that despite writing the script only a week after completing the DLC, I had to go back and play it again. This does not feel like an expansion. This feels like some side quests. The DLC touts its 12 story missions, but it's more like 4 or 5 story missions and then a bunch of side missions that just so happen to inch the plot forward. The actual side missions in this DLC are so simple that they are, and I'm not making this up, literally errands where you have to take an item down the street. It's 10 seconds. What are we doing, man? The entire DLC just felt so low effort, and I hate saying that because I really do like this game, but considering that this DLC, like Nightmare on North Point, doesn't even utilize your save files from the base game, I'd say don't bother with it. You won't get anything worthwhile aside from an outfit or two, and perhaps it's because I already completed the entire game and 2 DLCs at this point, but there was nothing new mechanically, and while the combat system is here and it's great, it's not strong enough to carry this game across the main campaign, side quests, and 3 DLCs. A good DLC builds upon the world, the characters, the gameplay, and the story of its base title, and this DLC only barely builds upon the world and characters to such a small extent that you could argue it is negligible. I wanted more, or at least something new. Instead, we just got a bunch of the same stuff that we saw in the main story, and while that isn't bad in itself, I was hoping for a new way to at least use our abilities instead of what we got. Considering that the story outside of the first 10 minutes feels just as disconnected as the other 2 add-ons, and I think that my frustration is less with what the DLC is and more with what it isn't. I also need to again acknowledge that I played this after fully completing the base game and 2 DLCs, so I could have just been burnt out on the game, and maybe that's just a me problem. If you enjoy this DLC, more power to you, but it just didn't do it for me. So while Sleeping Dogs may not have been the best, there were plans for a sequel. Sleeping Dogs 2 was put into development in 2013 and it was quite ambitious. It would see Wei as the main character again, being joined by a corrupt partner. With the ability to arrest anyone in the region and influence a branching story that saw the player in the shoes of both Wei and his partner, and the setting this time around would be in China's Pearl River Delta, they even planned to have a mobile game companion app, and that almost makes me thankful that the project was cancelled in that same year. Another unfortunately cancelled project is an online free-to-play spin-off called Triad Wars, which would have taken place in the same Hong Kong from Sleeping Dogs, where we play as a criminal attempting to rise up the ranks through a variety of missions and jobs. From what I saw, it seemed quite similar to Grand Theft Auto Online, and I think with Sleeping Dogs gameplay, it would have been stellar. The string of bad news unfortunately gets worse though, as United Front eventually closed its doors, meaning the odds of a sequel to Sleeping Dogs are as slim as it gets. Fortunately, the legacy of Sleeping Dogs is still something that stands to this day, with fans like myself still talking about and playing the game. Hell, even the subreddit is still active with funny clips and discussions. A lot of people can recognize that the game isn't perfect, and I don't think people are hailing this game as the next big thing, but for how solid it is, it deserved to at least sell more than it actually did. It only sold 2 million copies, and while it is a very large number, and while Square Enix did call its development a success, it was also considered a financial failure. I think the reason Sleeping Dogs is still talked about, albeit to a lesser extent today, is because the game executed its mechanics in a fantastic package, and it was as if it was all tied together with a bow and a cherry on top. The open world, in my eyes, while not necessarily as accurate as it could have been, has an unmatched aesthetic and level of detail that is truly worth commending. And that goes doubly so for its combat system. It was able to surpass any surface level comparisons to that of the Arkham series and solidify itself as something enjoyable and mechanically deep, or at least deep enough to last the runtime. The shooting wasn't in the same vein, but it at least fulfilled any super cop power fantasies and was used in a few different ways to keep things fresh. The level design itself followed suit, as outside of the combat, the game gave you many different ways to use your abilities, be that chasing someone down through parkour, planting bugs, using security cameras, street races, car-bound shootouts, jumping from one car to another, and the list just goes on. All of this under a story that was in my eyes compelling from start to finish and oozing with details, and I feel that Sleeping Dogs, while as mentioned isn't perfect, is still a must-play simply due to its unique concept and more than adequate execution. A game doesn't need to be perfect in order to be great. Despite a lot of this game not being up to snuff, with many side quests that feel like busy work and the DLCs that left more to be desired on almost all fronts, I still recommend it purely due to the passion I have for the game and hopes that it gives you the same passion. Who knows, maybe you too will ramble about it for over an hour. Maybe with enough passion from all of us we could potentially get a sequel, or at least a reboot God knows how long down the line. But maybe I'm drowning in wishful thinking on this one. I mean, even if we did get a sequel, with the amount of time we would be waiting, I don't know if I could handle something that disappoints and doesn't live up to the expectations. Maybe with how intense this game's fans are, and with how the distant memory of this game becomes further clouded, we may get to a point where nothing lives up to this game that has become cloaked in a rose tint. Maybe it's just better to let Sleeping Dogs lie.
Strange to say it after all that's happened, but Hong Kong kind of feels like home.
Hi everyone, this is like the first outro I've done in like months where I haven't been dead fucking tired while recording it, so this will be a change of pace. I just want to say thank you for watching the video. It means a lot to me. The video and this game means a lot to me, and so it was nice to kind of put all that passion into one project, even if it did take like a month. You know, I kind of went through a bit of a slump while I was editing this where I was getting like nothing done, but then I kind of picked up near the end, and so I'm grateful for that. I just want to say that if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find kind of just like random opinions and video stuff. It's not, I don't typically clutter the page. I do retweet a lot of cat videos and weird memes, if I'm being honest with you, but that's like about all you're gonna find. That, and I just want to say this video is coming out in during Pride Month, so happy Pride Month. I hope you guys enjoy that. I hope you look forward to the next video, and I don't even know what it's gonna be on. I know I want to do one on Dying Light, and I'm working on one for Dying Light, but that's like kind of a side thing right now. I think my next one might be Miles Morales, but I don't entirely know. I'll figure it out. I kind of want to wait a few days, rewatch the video in a few days, and kind of look at like, okay, where could I have improved? I want to say thank you to our patrons. I kind of forgot to do that, sorry. The patrons, you guys are honestly the best. You're the reason why I'm able to take my time with these videos and try and make them as good as I can. And I know they're not perfect, but they're the best I can do at the time, and I hope that I'm improving each time, because I feel like I'm improving. I feel like I do better and better with each video. So gold tier patrons, I apologize. Joseph, Bosnian, Christopher Moreno, Mark Short, please help, this isn't a Patreon name, Mel has a gun, please send help, oh god, I'm hit, and Pyrite. And then for our silver tier patrons, we have Chiefy, Jacob Douglas, Thomas Jones, and Gonzo Gonzalez. And then for the bronze boys, we have Denzel Ritesh, Nathan Figs, Overs the East, and Elfhednar 845719. Thank you guys so kindly for supporting the channel. It truly means a lot to me. It's like an incredible feeling knowing that people not only want to see what you have to say and the things that and they want to see what you do, but they want to pay you for it. Like, that to me blows my mind, and that you guys enjoy the videos enough that you're like, I want to help financially support this person, and I appreciate it. And my school tuition thanks you from the bottom of its heart. So yeah, if you want to join the Patreon, down in the description there you will find a link to that, along with a link to my Twitter, my Discord server, which is pretty relaxed. And yeah, that's basically all I gotta say. Leave any comments of feedback or anything, and I'll try and respond to as many as I can. I also opened up channel memberships, which is basically just an alternative to Patreon. That's all you have to know. If you're familiar with the Patreon, the channel memberships is the exact same thing. Anyways, I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're staying safe and staying healthy. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.